The first explosion tore through the gilded halls of Draker Vault, sending a shockwave that rattled the crystalline chandeliers overhead. Vaelzithir, one of the wealthiest and most formidable dragons of Zelvalis, did not flinch. The screams of his lesser staff barely registered. Instead, his golden eyes narrowed, scanning the chaos below from his private balcony. Something was wrong. This wasn't a mere accident. It was too precise, too deliberate. He exhaled, a curl of smoke slipping from his nostrils as his claws tightened around the marble railing. His palace was impenetrable, or at least it had been. The scent of burning silk and molten gold filled the air as his guards scrambled to restore order. Dragonkin soldiers, encased in obsidian armor, surged through the corridors, their massive forms moving with startling agility. A figure moved through the smoke, untouched by the mayhem. Small, delicate compared to the dragons, but confident. Vaelzithir's sharp gaze locked onto her, his human maid. She wove through the destruction with unnatural grace. Her feet barely made a sound on the scorched tiles. She was calm, unnervingly so. Most humans under his employ would be cowering by now, seeking shelter beneath the protective wings of their draconic masters. But not her. She had always been different. For years, she had worked in his household, her presence so unremarkable that even his keen instincts had overlooked her. She was efficient, quiet, and knew her place. Or so he had thought. Something about her movements unsettled him. She was not running. She was assessing. Vaelzithir stepped back from the balcony, disappearing into the shadows of his chamber. He moved swiftly, soundlessly, his massive frame defying its own bulk. He needed to see more. He descended through a hidden passageway, emerging in the grand ballroom, a space once reserved for the elite of dragon society. Now, it was littered with debris and smoldering remnants of the once opulent decor. And there she was, standing in the center of the destruction, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She did not tremble, did not show the weakness he expected from her kind. Her dress, a simple gray uniform, was untouched by the fire licking at the edges of the room. And standing beside her, wide-eyed with fear and wonder, was his son, Xirath. The young dragon's wings fluttered anxiously, his golden scales dimmed by soot. He looked to the maid, not his father, for guidance. Something in Vaelzithir's chest tightened. He stepped forward, and the movement finally drew her gaze. She did not bow. She had never been one to grovel like the others. But this was something new. There was an edge to her stare, a quiet challenge, as if she were measuring him. "Explain," Vaelzithir ordered, his voice a deep rumble that sent tremors through the marble floor. The maid tilted her head slightly, considering her words. "There was an attack," she said. "No unnecessary words. No panic. Just facts." Vaelzithir's tail curled behind him, a slow, thoughtful movement. He had faced enemies across the vast expanse of the galaxy, outmaneuvered rivals in business, crushed rebellions before they could bloom. He knew how to read an opponent. And this woman, this human, was no mere servant. Xirath shifted nervously. "She saved me," the young dragon admitted, glancing between them. "She told me where to run before the second blast." "Did she?" Vaelzithir murmured. The maid's expression did not change. Something coiled in his gut, something he did not like. He stepped closer, towering over her. "How did you know there would be a second blast?" She did not answer immediately. A lesser creature would have cowered. She did not. Instead, she met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw it. The flicker of something ancient, something sharp behind those human eyes. Not fear, calculation. "I heard the pattern in the first explosion," she said finally, as if the answer was obvious. A delayed detonation meant to stagger response teams. Basic tactical maneuver. The way she said it, detached, clinical, was not how a maid should speak. Vaelzithir had killed creatures for far less. Silence stretched between them, thick as molten gold. The air hummed with tension. Xirath, oblivious to the undercurrents of the moment, turned to her. "You knew what to do," he said, awe creeping into his voice. "Just like when you taught me the dance." Vaelzithir stilled. Something cold and insidious slithered down his spine. "The dance," he echoed. His son nodded eagerly. "Yes, the human dance. She showed me how to step lightly, how to move without sound." He spread his wings slightly, mimicking the motions. "She said it was important to know how to—" What was the phrase? The maid's eyes flickered. "To move unseen," Xirath finished proudly. The room fell colder. Vaelzithir's gaze sharpened. The human did not flinch. She merely exhaled, a slow, deliberate motion, as if weighing her next words carefully. "It was only a lesson," she said smoothly. "A lie. An elegant lie." Vaelzithir had spent centuries perfecting the art of deception. He recognized the precision in her delivery, the way she controlled her expression. Too much control. His tail lashed once, a warning. Was it? She tilted her head slightly, watching him, studying him. And then, for the briefest second, a ghost of smile touched her lips. Not one of amusement, one of acknowledgement. She knew that he knew. The realization sent a slow burn through Vaelzithir's chest. This woman, this insignificant human, was dangerous. And yet, she had saved his son. The weight of that truth pressed against him, unwanted and undeniable. The alarms in the palace had quieted. The fires were being extinguished. Order was being restored. But something had shifted. Vaelzithir could feel it, the way one senses the first crack in an unbreakable wall. The human maid had revealed nothing, and yet she had revealed everything. This was not over, not by a long shot. And as he watched her guide Xirath away, her movements precise and deliberate, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was not what she seemed, and he was going to find out why. Vaelzithir had always prided himself on his instincts. Centuries of ruthless business dealings, wars fought in the cold silence of deep space, and enemies crushed before they even knew they were playing against him had honed his ability to sense deception. He had smelled fear in draconic adversaries who stood twice his size. He had tasted the desperation of those who groveled for his mercy. And yet, here she was, his human maid, moving through his halls like a whisper of smoke, her secrets just out of his grasp. He was not a creature accustomed to being uncertain. The attack had rattled his estate, but the greater disturbance lay in the revelation that someone under his roof had known how to move through chaos with precision. The realization soured in his chest like aged venom. He had let this woman live in his presence for years, tending to his household, speaking softly to his son, teaching him, and he had never once suspected her. That would change. He observed her from the shadows now, unseen, as she moved through the aftermath of the attack. She walked between the guards, those towering, armored warriors who could snap her bones in a heartbeat, and yet none of them spared her more than a glance. She had cultivated invisibility. That, in itself, was dangerous. Xirath trailed behind her, his youthful energy dulled by the weight of the night's events. His golden scales had lost their usual luster, dust clinging to the edges of his wings. Vaelzithir did not intervene when he saw the boy glance up at the maid with something close to admiration. "You weren't afraid," Xirath murmured. She didn't look at him. Fear is only useful if you know when to listen to it. Vaelzithir narrowed his eyes. It was not the response of a servant. Xirath tilted his head. "So you do feel fear?" The woman's pace slowed just slightly, and for the first time since the attack, something flickered across her expression. Not quite hesitation, not quite calculation. "Yes," she admitted. Vaelzithir watched her, waiting. She could have left it there. A human servant would have left it there. "But not of fire," she said. "Not of loud noises. Not of things that can be broken and replaced." Xirath frowned. "Then what?" She finally turned to look at him, and for a brief moment, something old and distant clouded her eyes. "Of chains," she said. A silence stretched between them. Xirath, young and naive, did not understand. Vaelzithir did, and he had heard enough. He stepped from the shadows, letting his talons click deliberately against the marble. The moment she turned, her expression was composed, polite, but he had seen it. The briefest tightening of her muscles, the flicker of recognition in her eyes. She had known he was there. "Interesting. Myrra," he said, finally speaking her name. She inclined her head in acknowledgement. Not a bow, not submission, acknowledgement. Xirath's wings fluttered at his father's presence, but the boy did not speak. He had inherited his mother's silence in moments like these, watching, listening. Vaelzithir's gaze did not leave the woman. "Walk with me." It was not a request. To her credit, she did not hesitate. She fell into step beside him, keeping the measured distance of someone who understood space, proximity, threat assessment. He led her away from his son, deeper into the quiet corridors of his estate. The scent of burned silk still lingered, though the fires had been extinguished. Guards patrolled the perimeter, but he paid them no mind. Only when they reached a secluded chamber did he stop. He turned, and for the first time, allowed himself to truly look at her. "You are not a common maid," he said. A flicker of something crossed her face, so quick, so fleeting that had he not been watching for it, he might have missed it. But he did not miss things. "That is correct," she admitted. The honesty in her words was almost more unsettling than deception. He studied her, the way her shoulders did not tense under his scrutiny, the way her breathing remained steady despite standing in the presence of one of the most feared dragons on Zelvalis. "You have been here for years," he said. "I know every contract, every debt owed to my house. And yet, I do not recall the terms of your service." Her lips parted slightly, a whisper of amusement in her expression. "You never asked." A slow heat curled in his chest, but not anger. "Not yet. You fight like a soldier," he continued. "You move like an assassin. And yet, you have spent your time here washing dishes and teaching my son how to dance." The corners of her mouth twitched. "And what," she asked softly, "do you think dancing is, Vaelzithir?" His tail flicked, the air between them charged. A lesser creature would have filled the silence with excuses, pleasantries. She let it stretch, unafraid. He took a slow step closer, watching her. "I think," he murmured, "that I have underestimated you." Finally, a reaction, a slow inhale, a slight shift in her stance. A soldier, preparing for battle. "Tell me," he continued, voice a quiet rumble, "did you come here intending to kill me?" A single heartbeat. "No," she said. "Another beat. But that doesn't mean I won't." The words settled between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Vaelzithir exhaled slowly, considering. For the first time in centuries, something sharp and unfamiliar coiled in his chest. Not rage, not fear, intrigue. He should kill her. Right now. Snap her fragile human neck before she could become a threat. And yet, a long moment passed before he spoke again. "You saved my son," he said. "Yes." "What?" A pause. Then, because he is still learning how to dance. Something cold and dark and ancient twisted inside him. He had been playing a game. She had been playing a war. And he was only just beginning to understand the rules. For the first time in his long, calculated life, Vaelzithir was uncertain if he would win. Vaelzithir had not survived centuries of war and intrigue by ignoring threats. He studied them, dismantled them, ensured they could never rise against him. And yet, as he watched Myrra move through his halls in the wake of the attack, he found himself hesitating, not out of uncertainty, but curiosity. She had spoken the words plainly. "That doesn't mean I won't." A challenge, a warning. And yet, she remained under his roof, walking the same paths as before, no longer trying to disappear into the scenery. She had been seen, and instead of retreating, she moved with purpose, her presence now undeniable. A predator revealing its teeth. It was a dangerous game, but Vaelzithir did not fear danger. He invited it. The estate had been secured. His guards were stationed at every entrance, their keen senses scanning for intruders. The assassins who had infiltrated his home had been dealt with. Those who had survived the initial attack were now nothing more than broken bodies in his dungeons, their final hours stretching ahead of them in a haze of agony. Yet Vaelzithir was no closer to uncovering the true threat. He turned his attention to Myrra. She had known how to move through an attack. She had predicted a second explosion before it happened. And, most damning of all, she had trained his son. She had given Xirath the first steps to understanding how to disappear. It was no coincidence. That night, he did something he had not done in centuries. He observed. Myrra did not sleep immediately. When the estate quieted, when the flickering lights of the security patrols passed her quarters, she did something strange. She left, not in a hurry, not sneaking, just walking, as though she belonged everywhere. Vaelzithir followed, silent as a shadow. She moved through the servant corridors, the hidden veins of the estate meant for those unworthy to be seen. It was a path designed for ghosts, and she walked it like one. She slipped into the outer gardens, where the sky above was vast and heavy, stars scattered across it like shattered gemstones. And then she stopped. Vaelzithir stayed in the darkness, unseen. Myrra lifted her hands and, almost absently, began moving. Not an attack stance, not a defensive one. A dance. Slow, deliberate movements. A shift of weight, a pivot on the ball of her foot, an arm extended as if reaching for something unseen. He had seen warriors train. He had seen assassins perfect their art. This was something else. This was remembrance. Then a sound, a whisper in the air. Vaelzithir moved before he even thought, shifting just enough to remain unseen. But Myrra was already reacting. A small, silver device slipped from her sleeve. A comm link, barely the size of her palm. A secret. She was communicating with someone. Vaelzithir listened. "I remain," she murmured, her voice barely audible. The attack was premature. A pause. Static crackled. Then the child. "A beat." "He is learning," Myrra said. Something dark uncoiled in Vaelzithir's chest. Another pause. Then a final whisper. "You know it must be done." The transmission cut. Myrra did not move for a long moment. Then, slowly, she exhaled and tucked the device away, turning back toward the estate. Vaelzithir did not intercept her. Not yet. Instead, he let her return to her quarters, unaware that her secret was no longer hers alone. He stood beneath the starlight, his claws flexing against the marble beneath his feet. She was here for Xirath. Not for him. Not for his wealth. For his son. The revelation sent something cold through his veins, something deeper than anger, sharper than fear. Myrra was not simply an assassin. She was a teacher. Someone had sent her. Someone had placed her in his home, not to kill, but to guide, to mold Xirath into something else. Vaelzithir had seen countless betrayals, had crushed countless conspiracies, but never had one unfolded under his own roof with such patience, such precision. He had let his son take lessons in dance. He had not realized there were lessons in disappearance. Vaelzithir did not rage. He did not storm into Myrra's quarters and demand answers. Instead, he turned and walked back into the shadows of his palace. Myrra thought she was teaching his son. She thought she was playing a careful, measured game. She did not yet realize. She was about to become the student. Myrra awoke to silence. Not the gentle quiet of a sleeping estate, nor the comforting hush of solitude. This silence was wrong. Her breath stilled. The air was too still, the walls too expectant. She was not alone. Slowly, deliberately, she shifted beneath the thin sheets, her muscles coiling as if preparing for a strike. The darkness in her quarters was deep, but she did not need sight to know. He was here, a presence in the shadows, a storm waiting to break. Vaelzithir. She did not move, did not reach for the blade hidden beneath her pillow, did not shift toward the emergency exit she had mapped out long ago. It would do no good. If he had come to kill her, she would already be dead. So, she did the only thing left. She exhaled. You have questions. The silence stretched, thick as molten gold. Then, I have answers. The voice was deep, quiet, and impossibly close. A flicker of warmth brushed against her cheek, a slow exhale from a dragon who had stepped within reach. She did not flinch. Myrra sat up, her movements measured, the sheets pooling around her waist. Even in the darkness, she could feel his gaze, sharp and unyielding. You should have run, Vaelzithir murmured. She tilted her head slightly. And yet, you let me stay. A low hum, something between amusement and warning. For now, the weight of the unspoken threat settled between them. She had known this moment would come. The attack had only hastened the inevitable. Myrra met his gaze, or at least where she imagined it to be. You listened. It was not a question. She knew he had been there, beneath the starlight, when she had whispered those damning words into the comm link. Vaelzithir did not deny it. You came here for my son. A statement. Cold. Unforgiving. She let the silence answer for her. Why, he pressed. Myrra closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them. Because he is not safe here. The air shifted. Not safe. The idea was laughable. Xirath, heir to one of the most powerful dragon bloodlines, guarded by legions, feared across the cosmos. Not safe in his own home. Vaelzithir's tail flicked against the stone floor, the only sound in the room. Elaborate, he commanded. Myrra did not hesitate. He is too soft, too trusting, and those who seek to control him will carve that softness into a weapon. A slow inhale. Then, you think I will do this? She hesitated, just for a breath. No. A pause. But others will. Vaelzithir's claws flexed, but his voice remained steady. Who? She exhaled, leaning forward slightly. Do you truly think you're the only one who sees Xirath's potential? The words settled between them, heavy with implication. Xirath was not just an heir. He was an asset, and in the right hands, an unstoppable one. Myrra had not been sent to kill him. She had been sent to protect him, from the unseen war moving in the shadows, from the forces waiting to shape him into something neither she nor Vaelzithir could control. She had been sent to ensure that when the time came, Xirath would know how to disappear. A weapon unseen was a weapon undefeated. Vaelzithir understood this, and that, more than anything, made Myrra's presence here a threat. He could kill her now, end this before it could spiral beyond his grasp. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned closer. If they come for him, he murmured, they will fail. Myrra held his gaze, unwavering. And if they don't come to kill him? A flicker of something dark passed through his expression. She had seen countless warlords, strategists, and conquerors. Vaelzithir was different. He did not react with fury. He did not roar, did not lash out. He considered. A dragon who thought before he struck was a dragon who never lost. Finally he spoke. You trained him. It was not an accusation. It was acknowledgement. Myrra nodded once. I did. A slow exhale. Vaelzithir's claws tapped against the armrest of a chair he had claimed in the darkness. Teach me. The words sent a shock through her chest. She had expected many things. Rage, execution, exile. But this, she studied him carefully. You want to learn how to disappear? A quiet chuckle, low and rich. No, I want to know what you have already taught him. She hesitated. He saw it. You fear what I will do with that knowledge, he murmured. Myrra's fingers curled slightly. I fear what others will do. A beat of silence. Then stay. 2 words. A command. An offer. A challenge. Myrra felt something shift in the air between them. Something deeper than deception, heavier than suspicion. This was no longer a battle of secrets. It was a war of choices. Vaelzithir had every reason to cast her out, to end this game before it could be played any further. Instead, he had made his move. Myrra studied him for a long moment, then exhaled, and with the quiet certainty of someone who had already made her decision, she nodded. Vaelzithir leaned back, watching her. Not an enemy, not a servant, something else, a dangerous thing, a teacher. And just like that, the dance continued.